Hello again, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Louisiana Now podcast. My name is Todd Rossnagel, and I'm the Director of Communications for the Louisiana Conference. As we are in the midst of the coronavirus, we are all learning new ways to do worship. From Facebook Live to YouTube, some even radio operators out there holding church in the parking lot circa 1950s drive-in movie theater. We are truly in a time where nothing is new and everything is new. In this particular podcast, I'd like to offer up some tips on video, audio, lighting, social media, tips I've learned over the years, and tips based on your questions. I am hardly an expert in everything tech-related, but I have spent my entire life around cameras and would like to offer some insight. We won't be able to cover everything, but hopefully you can take away some pointers. Before we begin, my thanks to Mary Burley, hard at work, from home, like all of us, producing the Louisiana Now podcast, and of course, our thanks to the United Methodist Foundation of Louisiana, our sponsor, how they are helping churches, coming up later in the podcast. So let's begin. The first thing that I would like to address when it comes to social media, and for that matter, worship online, is this. All of us need to start preparing for 12 to 18 months of our current situation. In fact, 12 to 18 months of what might even be a more intense social distancing than what we are experiencing right now. And this isn't just my opinion. It's coming from several health experts. Take, for instance, an article in the Washington Post, dated March 16th, which at the time of this recording was 4 days ago. William Wan wrote this: "How long are we going to have to keep this up? The closed schools, working from home, 6 feet of personal space, and zombie apocalypse empty streets." He says it's the question now preoccupying America as millions of parents silently scream into the void amid the coronavirus pandemic. But it's an especially hard one for science to answer. The best and most honest reply, according to epidemiologists, is simple. It depends. It's not going to be over anytime soon, a matter of months rather than weeks. He goes on in the article to talk about how a lot of it depends on when U.S. cases finally reach their peak. Just this past week, President Trump recommended states with community transmissions to close schools, bars, restaurants, gyms, and other gathering spots, and he suggested the outbreak could last until July or August. In the Post article, it says, even after the peak, we may need drastic actions to keep the virus at bay. They go on to talk about how 2.5 months after the virus emerged in China, the schools have started reopening, but new cases continue popping up. So it is possible, even most likely, that after U.S. cases peak, Americans will still have to maintain some measures, such as isolating the infected, constant hand washing, some degree of social distancing, until a viable vaccine is developed, which could take 12 to 18 months. I know, 12 to 18 months. We're only, 1 or 2 Sundays of worship removed from this? My point is this. We need to start thinking about what our daily and weekly routines will look like. Can you sustain a Facebook Live prayer session every single day, twice a day, for an entire year? I hope you can, and you might. Several of you have been doing that every single day. Now, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying we need to stop Facebook Live. Hardly. Facebook Live is an incredible tool. All I'm saying is this. All of us need to start strategizing how our current pace can hold up for an entire year. Now that said, on to some tips and answers from some of your questions. Many of you are wondering about how to go live without using your phone. You've been saying things like, I need my phone to read the comments, or I need my phone because my sermon is on the phone and I didn't print it out. Now, there are a couple of different ways to do this. The easiest option is to utilize your spouse or a coworker and use their phone. You can also use another device like a laptop that has a webcam or an iPad. The best way is to utilize a slightly better camera. It can be a DSLR, like a Canon 5D or a Sony a6600, something that has a clean HDMI. Now, whenever I say this, people look at me with a weird look on their face. What in the world is he talking about, clean HDMI? Well, if you've ever looked into a camera's viewfinder and you see all of those electronic signals on the screen, a camera that has a clean HDMI does not carry over those graphics. A dirty HDMI signal, I guess that's the way you would describe it, does carry over those graphics, and it's ugly and basically unusable. So if you get a clean HDMI camera, and I'll leave a link in the show notes to a few that I've seen that are relatively inexpensive and ones that I even use here at the office, you can connect the camera to your laptop and then you can choose that camera when you go live. But it's not that easy. It never is. You'll need a piece of software known as an encoder. An encoder basically tricks your computer into thinking that the HDMI connected camera is essentially a webcam. Encoders are not that expensive, but they also don't give them away. I've included a link to one in the show notes. The next question that I have been getting a lot lately is about lighting. Good lighting is key, and bad lighting is, well, bad. There are some simple at-home solutions to improve your lighting. Now, before I get to those, though, I want to say the best way to improve lighting is to buy professional lights. Remember what I said earlier. We need to prepare for 12 to 18 months. If you invest in good lights and those estimations are exaggerated, guess what? You have good lights, and you can always use good lights. I've included some links to some various lighting kits in the description and the show notes of today's podcast. Now to the home solutions. The first, use Mother Nature. Get as close as you can to a big window and let that Louisiana sun shine into your face, open the blinds, and let Mother Nature light you up. The second tip is to use a lamp, preferably 2 lamps, one on your left and one on your right to evenly light you up. And here's the real key to a lamp. Remember those CFL light bulbs that came out several years ago? When they first came out, they had like this blue tint to them. Those light bulbs that looked like daylight. Many of us couldn't stand them, and we ran back to the store and asked for warmer lights because warmer temperature light bulbs is what we were used to. Well, those cool bulbs, and you probably have some stashed away somewhere, are actually great for video. They cast a normalized temperature of light that makes you look, well, less orange. I recently did a Facebook Live this past Sunday night for the conference where I talked about some tech tips, and I was incredibly orange. And you guessed it, the reason why is because I was using warm lights in my kitchen. While we're on the topic of improving your appearance, I have received a few questions about makeup, specifically from men. Todd, I know male anchors in TV wear makeup. Should I be wearing makeup? Well, the answer depends. If you have a super crisp 4K camera with amazing light washing over your face, a bit of makeup won't hurt. For the most part, I don't think any of our cameras on social media platforms today require makeup. So the answer is no need for makeup. From lighting, we move to the next reason folks will tune out of a Facebook Live, or for that matter, any videotaped message: bad audio. I cannot express to you how important it is to have good audio. It's incredibly important. Too many times we just take audio for granted. We turn on the news and the anchors sound perfect. The actor in the movie sounds perfect. Little do you know just how much work is going on in the background to make people sound so good. All phones, including iPhones, have the capability of adding a microphone. So add one. They are not that expensive. You'll sound better, a lot better. And for your Zoom calls, add a USB microphone or the earbuds that came with your phone. They likely came with a microphone. And a quick note about Zoom meetings, as they seem to be the channel of choice right now, and for good reasons. It's a very stable platform and works quite well. Zoom meetings are ideal for Bible study or small groups. I've seen plenty of Bible studies on Facebook, and those are great, but just remember, when we gather together for Bible study, we want to interact and hear from everyone in the group. And it's also very likely that the group in the study wants to remain private. This is why a private link to a private group works so well for covenant groups. A tip. Some of you have wondered if the church needs a pro Zoom account and if that pro account can be shared. An idea here, the free account is free, though it limits your time to just 40 minutes. You could, in theory, have 10 different free accounts as long as you have 10 different emails for 10 separate groups inside the church. You'll have to manage a bunch of different logins, but it's one way to allow several groups to meet at one time, like, for instance, Sunday mornings during what normally would be Sunday school hour. We can't talk about tech without talking about technology that leads to giving. As you know, the Louisiana Now podcast is sponsored by the United Methodist Foundation of Louisiana. They can help you set up online giving portals and platforms. It can be complicated and can also be overwhelming. And you're going to be buying new lights in the coming days, right? So someone needs to help you with this. The foundation can help you. Reach out to them. umf.org is their website for more information. Finally, let's go back to that Facebook Live event that I held last Sunday. I've received a ton of questions about something we discussed during that live session: how to speak to a camera lens. I want to unpack this a bit more because it can be tricky. Most of you are trained or were trained to preach before an audience, and speaking directly to a camera is not something that is normal. It takes practice and it takes patience. But using your imagination is key. I spoke of looking through the lens to an imaginary audience, and some of you thought, well, that's just Rossnagel, he's weird. But others said that it has worked. You have to imagine that your congregation is sitting just beyond the lens. In my video, I spoke of how I had an imaginary audience, a family that I was speaking to. I anchored the morning news for almost a decade, and each morning as I would look into the lens, I had an imaginary family that I was delivering the news to. I imagined the entire scene. Mom was always running late, kids were sitting at the breakfast table, and in the background was me delivering the news. It helped because I knew that they were distracted by the morning routine. So as I delivered the news, specifically in the morning, I knew that I needed to speak as if to get their attention. It certainly didn't mean that I yelled. It just meant that I would use different verbs, adjectives, and inflection. My point in all of this is that we need to use our imagination. We are in store, or really in the midst, of a very different church. And many pastors did not receive lighting and audio classes while attending seminary. But there's also a pretty good chance that someone in your congregation is willing to step up and help. The question is, are you willing to step up, ask, and even learn something new? The church needs us. Our community needs us now more than ever. And as you've seen on social media, several of you have shared it recently. The phrase is no longer "the world is my parish." The phrase is now "the World Wide Web is my parish."